Hi, welcome to About Town, a program about the 169 towns in the state of Connecticut, and they still are 169 towns. My guest today is my favorite senator, Senator Tony Boucher, my own senator from the 26th, and there are 7, and I'm going to name them, 7 towns, including Weston and Wilton, and Westport, and Reading, and Ridgefield, and Bethel, and New Canaan.
Yes,
Is that it?
good job.
Well, okay, so here we are in the summer. The legislature, thank goodness, is finally out of its session and its special session.
That's right.
I've been to see you and your 4 cohorts, other cohorts, including a Democrat, down last week, I think, in Westport at the Chamber of Commerce, which was like a funeral. I mean, they were very unhappy.
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, we're going to be in Weston as well, at the lunchbox, having coffee with people, and I make it a point to, after our session and during it, to visit all of the 7 towns and really have a discussion, listen to what the constituents in those particular towns are concerned about and what they would like to see us do. And you're right, people are very unhappy right now, and it doesn't matter what political party. In fact, some of these town hall meetings that you just referred to, I've never had so many people show up. And one questions, why are now people paying attention? People that are typically really sometimes apathetic about their state government. They pay attention to the national news. Well, guess what? Connecticut has become national news. And it's not because of anything the minority party has done to have this discussion, although they've tried to do that. What's happened is that in this last budget cycle, something unusual occurred that never has occurred before, and that is our top national, multinational, international corporations that are headquartered in Connecticut actually reacted to this budget in a way they never have. They never go public, but they did this time. And when a GE, a Travelers and Aetna, a Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Black & Decker, and companies of that stature say publicly that this budget is hurtful to them and has them consider leaving, well, it made national news. And all of a sudden, CNBC and MSNBC, Joe Scarborough, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, the Hartford Courant, and big newspapers throughout Connecticut have all covered this. And now everybody's paying attention, because although a person in Connecticut may not work for one of these large firms, just GE alone, even if they didn't pay 1 cent in taxes, spends $14 billion within Connecticut and with Connecticut companies. Not to mention that the employees, and many of them, they all pay state income tax, they pay sales tax, they pay every kind of tax, and they populate our restaurants, our dry cleaners, our car washes. And by the way, car washes are now newly taxed.
Oh, yeah.
In this particular budget. So what has happened is there was a historic tax increase in 2011, followed now this year by the 2nd highest tax in the state's history. And Margaret, it didn't have to be. The minority party worked really hard, rolled up their sleeves, and instead of saying, no, we don't agree, actually said, well, here's another way. Here's an alternative budget, not only for our operating funds, but even for our transportation fund. We showed a way to reallocate and reprioritize current bonding capacity right now without adding 1 toll or more taxes, and reallocate it, and showed how we can get nearly, with the government matching funds, nearly $1 billion more in spending for infrastructure.
Yes, but you realize, of course, now that with all 3, the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, you're whistling in the wind. They were not listening. Well, at least my observation.
Well, let me tell you what has occurred, though. I feel a change in the wind, Margaret. I think there is a shift on the horizon. And that is because what has happened from all of this news media, I've never seen the kind of response. People tell me that the year in 1991, when the income tax was enacted, that the same kind of public discontent could be heard everywhere. People marched on Hartford. Well, this time, thousands upon thousands of people called, emailed the governor's office, the leadership, about their unhappiness. That did produce a slight change in the special session, a backtracking, for example, on a very onerous data processing tax, which would have really hurt companies that are buying software or selling software. They did take that out. But they only delayed for 1 year the really onerous tax to these corporations, which is the unitary tax. It forces them to report all the sales outside of Connecticut, add it, and then be taxed on it down the road. And that's untenable for many. And that was just a delay. But it was a movement, and it did tell the leadership that something is terribly wrong and that there may be a change. Margaret, not to be too political about this, but in fact, the last election in 2014, we had the biggest change in the House of 10 more seats converted, in addition to the ones already held, converted to the minority party. And in the Senate, when I started, there were 12 Republicans. Now there are 15. And there's a sense that the next election in 2016, even my Democratic friends are very concerned about this for their party, that if we make a similar movement, then the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate will become minority leaders. And the minority leaders would become majority leaders. And so the conversation will change dramatically if that's to occur. The kind of discontent I'm feeling does seem that a shift may occur down the road if people don't come to this realization. And it is because really the makeup of the majority party has changed as well. I've always been in both. When I served in the House, and I did serve for 12 years in the House, and now in the Senate, I served under Democratic leadership, and it worked fine. That leadership was very cognizant of the fact that jobs had to be a top priority, and they weren't going to put in policies that would send them to other states. Those individuals have left and retired, and others have taken their place, and now there's a definite emphasis on state employees and their benefits and keeping them at all costs, including bringing our state in this very bad situation. Highest debt per capita, lowest rankings in almost every way, the lowest job growth of any state. You know, that needs to be, you know, we recently had a governor of another state come to Connecticut to poach our jobs and our businesses. And I wanted to listen to what they had to say, because it's always good to know what the competition is saying so you can reverse course or change policies to better compete. And it was striking. Some of the things really resonated with me. One of them was make jobs your top #1 focus before anything else. Make sure employers tell their employees what taxes will do to their job, how it'll affect their job. He says, measure the heck out of everything. In other words, do a return on investment. Any new program you want to bring in, think about the programs then that you can replace that with, so you're not keep adding to the bloat of government.
As we all, get older and whatever, and a certain generation, and then industries change and they don't need things, and then the internet and all kinds of people work at home and blah, 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 blah. All these things are changing.
They are.
And I remember when Judy Friedman, before she retired, stepped aside for you, she said, oh, I just went to this thing up in Hartford, from the OPM people and whatever. Oh boy, I don't want to be around here, because the way the projections were going,
right,
as certain groups age, as certain industries disappear or go overseas or whatever,
sure,
it's going to be a different Connecticut.
It will be a different, it's a different world we live in. Robotics is changing the workplace. Many jobs that were labor intensive are now going away. So we have to think differently, and we have to train differently. That's why education is so important. But remember, at the same time that Connecticut is shrinking, other states are growing by leaps and bounds. We have states that are adding congressional seats. One state added 4 congressional seats because so many people and businesses moved to their state. So that's what we need to look at. If you have policies that make it less expensive to live here and work here, you can expand the tax base and you actually increase your revenues. When you have people leaving and jobs leaving, there are fewer people to pay those high taxes. And as a result, the cost and the burden rises for everyone. And that's what's happening right now. That's the dynamics. Now, as you said, the workplace is changing. We have to change with it. That means education is key and number one. And that's the other priority. Jobs should be number one because that protects your base and your revenue base, your tax base. But education should be right up there. And thirdly, transportation. Because if we take care of those things, we will have the additional funds to take care of our most vulnerable population. We will take care of our frail elderly, our disabled population. And that's very important for the health of our state and the quality of life here as well, to be fair and equitable to everyone. And education, as I know, is a big priority for Weston and the other towns in the district that I have. I'm so proud that 6 out of the 7 towns have high schools that are in the top 10 in the entire state of Connecticut. And we did, just so individuals out there know, 80% of what we do in Hartford is bipartisan. Mm-hmm. We all work together. It's on, many of it is put on a consent calendar, which means no one has to discuss it. It's just a slam dunk. It's unanimous vote. Mm-hmm. And education tends to be one of those areas. And some good things did occur, both for the communities like Weston. We removed a big mandate called the minimum budget requirement, mm-hmm. forcing towns to spend a certain amount, the same as the year before, even if they're declining enrollments, even if their educational outcome is outstanding. This year, there was a bill that removed that mandate.
How much would that actually save?
Well, it depends on the community. Some towns are losing enrollment more than others. Mm-hmm. By the way, that's a negative trend too. Mm-hmm. Even if you look at the general population in the country, and where say we have fewer student or children being born, it is not as dramatic as we're seeing in Connecticut, because as families move out and young people move out for better opportunities in jobs, we also see a reduction in our schools. And there's some towns in the district that are dramatically reducing enrollment. And as a result, to be forced to spend the same as the year before when you have this dramatic reduction, and the state allows for some giving back. However, it's a very small amount. You can take a credit, and only up to a certain point of about $3,000 per pupil. We all know that our towns in this district spend anywhere from $17,000, $18,000 to $20,000 to $21,000 per year per student. Mm-hmm. And so that is onerous, and yet they're still blowing out the lights in educational quality and outcome, which is terrific. We also had an interesting bill that I worked hard on, and others as well, that would take out the Smarter Balanced Common Core mandated test at the 11th grade and allow the state to allow towns to use a college readiness test like the SAT or ACT. Mm-hmm. That would be an outstanding, and will be an outstanding change, because so many students have to take it anyway.
So let me get this straight. Okay, so the Smarter Balance is in the lower grades?
So it's in the, well, it is throughout your lower grades as well, an 11th grade test, which the 11th grade is
in high school.
In high school, but a very difficult time for students because they're taking every test you can think of during that time.
What's the time that they take it before 11th grade? Do you recall?
Well, we used to have the Connecticut Mastery Test, and that was required at the 10th grade. In my view, that's makes sense, because in the 11th grade you have the PSAT, the SAT, the ACT, you have AP, every course that you have an AP test, there's another test associated, a national test. And for some students in the inner city, paying for a test, $50 for the SAT, can be burdensome for them. Wouldn't it be better, since we have to pay for a test anyway, for a test like that, that they would have an opportunity to use for entrance to college or community college? Wouldn't that be a better idea? And it made so much sense that we actually got it through. So that's just one of several other good bills that were worked on together in a bipartisan way. So the public should know that 80% of what we do is done cooperatively, but that 20%, is we really diverge, and we really have some very active debates, I'll put that mildly, and that's where the real rubber meets the road.
Yeah. Well, my concern is when I announced, welcome to the About Town program, about 169 towns, I'm wondering, are there going to be 169 towns at some point?
Well, that's another good point. Some of the things that we're very concerned about is some movement, and it has been for the last few years. You know, death by 1,000 cuts. If someone really is geared to do this, and the administration's behind the effort of regionalizing Connecticut, like Westchester County in New York, they see that it has meets with a lot of resistance. So they put little steps in year after year until they get to the ultimate goal. There are many of us that don't believe in regionalized government and another layer of bureaucracy and another layer of taxes. I experienced that for 12 years in the Midwest, and I saw what it did. We look at Westchester, and I have towns on the border that I represent, the towns of Richfield, the towns of Wilton, the towns of New Canaan. They border New York. Richfield has so many new residents that moved to Connecticut simply to get away from that other layer of taxation that county government gave them in Westchester County. These various bills that are proposed, and some of them passed, starts off with regionalizing a property tax or making it a statewide and redistributing that. There's a movement in that. There's also a movement, you know, to have a common calendar for schools.
There's the car tax issue, of course.
Car tax.
And they're taking some of the money and giving it back to the region if the region wants to use it.
Right.
And they're also talking about development in towns.
Yes.
Sharing.
Yes.
I remember,
Yes.
you know, I've heard of this for years.
Yes.
And, yeah, right.
Yes.
They're going to share people's, you know, if they're going to develop commercially or whatever, they're going to share it.
As I was mentioning, that many people move from New York line, from Westchester County to get away from county government and the other level of taxation. The part and parcel of that is to the state providing a carrot to towns by lulling them to feel that they're going to reduce their car property tax, which, by the way, many states do not. Connecticut's one of the last remaining states that actually taxes your car as property just for sitting in your garage every year, which is, again, another onerous. And their thought is, well, you know what we'll do? We'll cap that cost, and then we'll take those funds and redistribute it, and we'll make sure nobody gets hurt in the process. Well, you know that line.
Right.
You know, at the end of the day, when they run out of money at the state, then all of a sudden the towns find themselves short or are put in a difficult position. That's just one of the areas. But as you mentioned, there were different bills that really raised one's eyebrow. And that is, if you do economic development, then you'll share it amongst all of the towns in your Council of Governments region. And by the way, ours has 18 different towns in them. And a lot of them don't necessarily agree to go in a direction that maybe other towns might go. We also had a bill that would allow municipal employees to join the state health care plan instead of staying local. And once they do that, they take all of the control over the local municipality over those healthcare costs, because they no longer will be able to negotiate or control them. It'll all be done centrally at the state level. You can see where that's going. I was in county government for 12 years when I was in the Midwest before coming back to our home state some 35 years ago. And I will tell you, it wasn't a pretty picture the way I saw it. It was actually more political than ever.
Yes.
You had towns that had more representation on that council of their governments, and all of a sudden, all the funds and revenues tend to go to that particular part of that county. And some schools were starved of funding, and others received a great deal of benefit. And that kind of politics was rampant, and the costs grew as well, because state taxes did not go away. It just was an additional tax. So there are many of us that will oppose that strongly. I believe that our individual local communities are what make Connecticut very special, and the fact that we all are very different communities, even within the 7 towns I represent, they're vastly different from one another in demographics, makeup, needs, and the kind of town services that are needed to be provided, where there's similarities, and they want to voluntarily join hands and budgets. That's great. They can do that right now, Margaret. They can do that right now. And I am concerned about the state interfering with local economic development as well. They can be there to provide a level playing field. They can have grants that encourage different companies individually. But as far as telling them where and what they should put in their part of the town knows best.
I believe the budget originally during the long session, after whipping everybody to stay up all day, passed 73 to 70, I believe, in the House.
Right, and there was only one vote in the Senate. Now, why is that? And it's interesting you should mention it, and we should just clarify that in government, either the president or a governor will propose a budget and lay out their plan for what they see as a vision, either for the country or for the state. And in that budget, it shows where their priorities are in each and every department. So it is a very important document. It's a broad document, and it is the responsibility of the executive branch, since they have to implement that budget and carry our state forward. There was some big holes in that budget, particularly as it never was balanced. When the state income tax was enacted in 1991, a constitutional amendment was proposed that passed by 82% of the public voting on it that would create a spending cap, so you didn't spend so much that it became unsustainable for people to stay. That spending cap, though, is of late, especially in the last couple of years, so much of the state budget was put off budget and taken out of the spending cap requirement that it no longer is a valid spending cap anymore.
And just to further underline what you're saying, I believe the state treasurer, who was certainly a buddy of the administration,
Absolutely.
couldn't bring herself
Right.
to, at least initially, she was saying, wait a minute.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, she has to. You know, it's a fiduciary duty. When your rating agencies, Moody, Finch, and S&P, they all are saying something's terribly wrong here with your financial structure in Connecticut, and that's going to cost you a lot more in interest because you're putting your state at risk. And let me tell you, there were many that were saying that Connecticut was becoming like Detroit, only on the Sound, on Long Island Sound, because of its financial problems. And we have been constant, and just a recent report from one of our universities pronounced that Connecticut was in the worst fiscal shape of any state in the Union. And it's been going downhill with this particular administration. And people are reacting to it, and businesses are reacting to it. This is a very, very serious thing.